Welcome to the Green Ocean Weekly Podcast, a show to inspire current and aspiring leaders in real estate. I'm Paige Ward, your host. So welcome to part one of a two-part episode, one that's kind of near and dear to my heart because it gets you in the feels, and I love that. But we're really going to talk today about meaning and purpose and mattering, because when it comes right down to it, it's such a basic human need, and we all want to belong, and we want to all feel like we matter. We have a special guest today, Helen Chung, who's amazing, and she's going to be sharing her insight, and I know that we're all going to really benefit from that. So I want to really quickly touch base on what went well. That's something we like to do every week, as you know. And so, Helen, I think you're probably familiar with this. So since you're our special guest, what went well for you this week?
That's a great question. I was looking forward to answering this one. So a highlight for me this week was actually, it occurred last night. Our youngest son, his name is James, he's 15, decided to make dinner. You know, sometimes he gets a little bit grumpy when he cooks, and I haven't always been sure about why. What's the cause of the grumpiness? Is it because like he's resentful that I'm not cooking for him? Or is it, what could it be? So I decided to take a break because I was working all day in my office. I decided to take a break, go into the kitchen, and I just helped him out by cleaning up, doing the dishes, asking him, oh, what are you going to put in next? Suggesting, why don't you try putting in some basil? You put it at the end, so it doesn't cook all the way through. And he was not at all grumpy. And the finished product itself was delicious, and we all enjoyed the pasta. But it was the process that was a little different this time. And I realized, I need to make myself available for these moments when he's in the kitchen, because usually he's upstairs in his room on his computer. So I've got to take advantage of those moments and not take control, but just be there and support. And he was really encouraged by that. He didn't say it to me, but I felt a difference in the energy, and I got to enjoy his delicious pasta. So that's something that went well this week.
Well, Helen, thank you so much for sharing that. And let's throw it to Jason. What went well for you this week, Jason?
Well, this is sort of a double-edged sword, but it was my birthday this week. And so a couple things. Yeah, well, And the first thing is I woke up and I thought I was 48 years old. So I spent about half my day being a lot closer to 50 than I was really comfortable with, And it wasn't until my mother-in-law called me and said, happy 47th birthday. And I said, what, 47? And she corrected me, and I realized I got a year younger. So that went really well. But what was really amazing, though, is that my incredible wife put together a surprise birthday celebration weekend for me. And she got together a lot of our family and a bunch of my close friends, and we were able to take them up to the property. And although I spent the entire weekend barbecuing, setting up, and cleaning, that feels good to me. I love having everybody around. I love being of service, and I love just the fact that people were willing to come out in these times, especially, and celebrate with me was pretty awesome.
That's a sign that you're maturing, Jason, is you always think that you're the year older than you actually are. I don't know what it is about that. I don't know if you guys have that problem, but you always think you're like the next one. So yay, happy unbirthday.
Thank you.
So Howard, what went well for you this week?
Well, I always like to punch it back over to you first. So what went well for you, Paige?
I should have seen that coming. Do you know, it was really interesting. A few months ago, I was friended on social media by a gal in media, and we have very similar interests. And it's funny because I forgot to actually ask her. I don't know why she friended me in the first place, because I'd never met her. But over the last few months, we've really been communicating more over social media, she has a cool podcast. I've been listening to that, and it's like everything she was saying sounded like something that would come out of my mouth. So finally we decided that, okay, we have to meet in person. And so I met her over in Factoria on Friday, sitting on a little bench out in the sidewalk, far apart, and we just had the most wonderful conversation. And it's just that people reaching out to others, even if they're complete strangers, but you may have shared interests, and being willing to take the time to nurture that and find out. And, you could come away with that with a really cool new friend. And that's exactly what happened. And so I'm excited about that. She's a really cool chick. And, it's really interesting, the people that we know in common. But so that's always kind of a fun thing too. So yeah, that just made my heart happy. So that went well. So right back at you, Howard.
Well, I think I often talk about my kids, and something that like Helen did, as far as like something that went well, and it's often in relation to time and some kind of activity. And I think we've all heard that, it's just like, how do you spell love, right? How do you spell love for kids? And it's T-I-M-E, right? With time, not quality of time, but just time, right? Time itself. And my mom is kind of stage 4-ish Alzheimer's. My dad's the full-time caregiver. Saw him a couple nights ago. They live pretty close, and yeah, he just called me up and just said, "Hey, can you just come over? Mom needs to just see your face." Right. And when he says that, I also know it's like he needs to see my face. He needs to have engagement, because my mom doesn't speak anymore, unfortunately. And so he just needs that social dialogue and interaction. And so just sitting with them and smiling with them and watching TV with them, having, a little food with them, it just makes a big difference. So what went well? Nothing crazy or spectacular. It was just that moment where we could just reminisce, and I just got my dad to talk about what a blessing it's been to be a first-generation immigrant and all the history and life together. And I think there is power when you get to even reminisce, right, and retell your own story, even to your own family member. It was just a reminder of what a blessing it is, just to live life even in difficult circumstances. So that went well, just spending that time and getting a chance to rehear his story, because it's always a little nuanced.
That is beautiful, and good for your dad for reaching out, because that's not always easy. And I know he reached out on your mom's behalf, but certainly you all benefited from it, and good for him. And so maybe that's just a good reminder to all of us to make that phone call, or it's okay to ask for company and conversation. So today, again, this is actually going to be episode 1 of 2. We think that this is a subject matter that warrants a little bit more extended conversation. And so today, again, we're going to be talking about mattering. And Helen, you're quite an expert on this, and we want to really kind of start with you and hearing. Let's start with our baseline here, and then we'll build from there. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us today.
I'll just share a little bit about my background, and then I will move into this idea, this concept of mattering. So my name is Helen Chung, and I'm an assistant professor of industrial organizational psychology at Seattle Pacific University. And so that my background is org psychology. It simply means the study of psychology applied to the workplace. And so our job is really to help organizations be more effective, sort of at that individual, team, and sort of the macro level outcomes for the organization. And then I wear another hat, which is I'm also a leadership development coach. That's a little bit about me. This theory of mattering is something that I recently stumbled upon. And the theory comes from a community psychologist named Isaac Prelel-Tensky. And I can't promise that I'm saying his last name correctly. And so I stumbled upon an article that he wrote. It's actually very recent, and it's called Mattering at the Intersection of Psychology, Philosophy, and Politics. And essentially, what he proposes is that human beings have a fundamental need to matter. And there are two sort of complementary sides to that, to experiences, to mattering. The first is to matter to others, and that's to feel valued, to feel worthy, to have an experience of dignity. And the other side of that is to give value, to contribute value to oneself and to others in the community. So it's really two sides of one coin. One side is to feel valued, the other side is to give value. And what I really love about this theory is that it doesn't just stop at the individual interior level, because sometimes I think in Western society and culture, we tend to think about well-being at the individual level of who am I, how am I doing? But you flip the coin and we've got to think about the question, who am I in relation to other people? Not just in the sense of mattering to other people, but also having the power, agency, and some control over affecting other people's lives in a really positive way, as well as being able to affect one's own life in terms of having that autonomy.
I find it really interesting that we all shared our what went well, and it was all about time spent with people we cared about. Jason, with your family up, you know, at the cabin, and Howard with your parents, and Helen with your son. I mean, that right there is the first thing that I noticed, is that you talk about giving meaning to your life. And truly, I think it starts with who you have around you.
Paige, I find it interesting that Helen didn't mention the fact that she's married to me. And so,
Well,
you know, I'm sure some people are making an assumption that we are married, right? I mean, she's literally downstairs right now in her office. I'm upstairs in the bedroom makeshift office here. But yes, we are married, Helen, and that's a whole nother story. We met in Jerusalem, of all places, right? Just very randomly, but that's a whole nother story. But, you know, one of the things that she and I were talking about before we got started is the fact that, and she shared this video with me, this YouTube video, of Isaac. I didn't want to attempt to say his last name, but he starts off the conversation with disengaged workers, right, around the world, not just the country, but around the world. There's so many people who are disengaged with work. And so I think, you know, a lot of thought can be put into, oh, why are people disengaged with work? Is it the leader? Is it the boss? Is it the team around him? Is it the work itself? And so all of a sudden, it's like this mattering. And I think there's almost maybe a flip side to the word mattering, which is meaning, right? Is this work meaningful? Am I doing meaningful work? And so I think we can all have experiences, you know, ourselves and others, where if the work isn't meaningful, if the work doesn't matter, I'm going to just naturally be disengaged. And, you know, we're talking about the real estate industry where frequently, in fact, probably the majority, I don't have the exact specifics, but we, you know, just know in general that the people who come into the business, this is generally a second, a third, or even a fourth career. Right? The average age of the realtor who comes into the industry, they're not in their 20s, they're actually still in their 50s, right? Upon the most recent study that I saw. And so it's like they've had work done before and they want more meaning, you know, so it's not always about money, but they want to have more control. They want to have more meaning with the work. And they feel that real estate, the home ownership experience, the transaction experience is such an important piece. And so they decide to come into the real estate business for meaning, for mattering. I mean, Helen, can you, I don't know, elaborate a little bit, maybe either on the disengagement or, you know, the fact that people are looking for meaningful work?
Yeah, I think that at the core of meaningful work is, you know, do people get to do something that, you know, gives value to them? And across individuals, that might be defined a little bit differently. Like, I mean, there might be an individual who is working a job that brings instrumental value. And what I mean by that is that they get a paycheck out of that job, and that paycheck enables them to take care of themselves and to take care of their family members if they have family members. So there's that instrumental value to work in that, you know, it enables us to live, to take care of ourselves and others. There's also meaning in work in terms of the work itself. So and I think to some degree what you're talking about with disengaged workers, there is definitely a phenomenon worldwide of workers not really feeling engaged with the work for any number of reasons. One of those reasons could be that they don't understand how their work matters for the organization. Like, how does what their piece of the work actually, you know, contribute to the final product, if it's a product, or to the final service, for example. And I mean, you think about like how a restaurant is run. You have many components and you have many different employees in a restaurant. You have the front and you have the back staff. And so, you know, a leader in that restaurant would want to ensure that every employee understands how what they're doing adds to the whole sort of restaurant experience for the customer. And so being able to understand that larger picture can help with that with that work engagement. Also, another aspect of feeling engaged to work would be, gosh, does the individual feel like they have the right training and the right skills to do the job well? Are they being developed on the job in a continual manner so that they can continue to, you know, grow in their competency to reach a level of mastery, and then to go from there to expand their skills to be able to do other things. So growth on the job in terms of competency toward mastery, in the addition of new skills, that's also an important aspect of work. So there are kind of many layers to this, so we could probably talk about additional layers, but those are some of the pieces of finding meaning in work.
I'm going to bring in the fact that you do like to watch these Korean dramas on Netflix. It's kind of her go-to, I think, like, you know, in order to recover after literally many hours all day long of research and work. She does like her Korean dramas, and there was this one that was fascinating. You know, I kind of caught glimpses of it here and there, and it was all about the workplace. It wasn't a romance. It wasn't like one of those type of dramas. It was just about this individual belonging to a team in the workplace.
That particular drama that you're referring to is called Mishang. It's spelled Misaeng. Not that Jason or Paige, you may not be too interested in it, but you know what I love.
Know that? I might be very interested.
I might be sort of, yes, there are subtitles, but you know, the it's not a typical Korean drama in that it's not really, it doesn't revolve around romantic relationships. It's about the team members' relationships. And this particular drama highlights a sales team. And in East Asian sort of work culture, it tends to be very hierarchical. So you have the team lead, and then you have, you know, kind of the second in command, and then you've got maybe the third in command. And then there's always that intern who, you know,
that intern.
who tends to be the college grad. And in this particular series, the intern is not a college grad. He doesn't have really the right credentials. So everybody around him sort of dismisses him. Mm-hmm. And they say, gosh, who is this person? He must have had a personal connection in order to get this job. He didn't really earn it on his own terms. This intern he becomes so invested in the work of the team and just pours his life into making contributions, and it makes a difference. And but there are struggles along the way, and what the drama really highlights is, at the end of the day, how we interact with our team members, the meaning that we have in those social relationships, the ability to make a contribution, to be recognized for the contribution. Those are really important elements for finding meaning in work. So I love that drama because it's like, it puts a real sort of spotlight on how we derive a sense of purpose and meaning and fulfillment in our teams. And I know in real estate, team dynamics are critical, right?
Yeah. So Helen, I have a question for you, and I know how we kind of touched on this a little bit before we were talking, but as you know, somebody that does own a franchise, and I'm building my team now, with having to do everything by Zoom and virtually, I am finding it a little bit more challenging to, like you mentioned, create culture. Like, how do we do that on Zoom calls? How do we do that if we're not having mixers and social engagements? And I can share one thing, you know, like I'm lucky enough to be part of John L. Scott, which does a lot as far as keeping us trained and providing a ton of information and awesome tools. One of those is they provide me with a sales meeting PowerPoint each week. And, you know, the first couple of weeks, you know, we're kind of new and we're just like, okay, what are we doing? And I'm following this PowerPoint, you know, maybe a little bit too closely. And there's probably not a whole lot of engagement. And so my partner and our, what we're calling our agent development coach, we all put our heads together and we're like, okay, what can we do to better this situation? How can we get people involved? And so we've been working pretty hard at that. One of the things we're doing is we're picking one agent each week and we're kind of interviewing them. And then we're also using the what went well strategy, and we're going around the room and asking everybody went well for the week. And so the meeting has really turned a corner, and I feel like everybody's really involved and feels like they're a part of and feels really good about it. But what are some other things that we could be doing?
I love the strategy that you talked about, Jason. And I'm glad to hear that that's working well. You know, when I think about the virtual format, there are some things that are more difficult to do. So some of that is just building personal connection. So when we think about when we meet face-to-face, like if you have a sales meeting, you know, a face-to-face sales meeting, for example, there's always like the before and the in-between and the after. Those little hallway conversations or those little side tidbits that you share with your peers and with your colleagues. And that doesn't tend to happen as much in the Zoom or the online spaces because there's a clear structure. You kind of get right to it, right? So some of the sharing, divulging of personal information and history and what's going on. I love the fact that you're doing what went well because that's personal. I think the more that we can build in some of that personal space of connection, whether it's informally the first 5 minutes or maybe staying on the call a little bit, you know, after the formal meeting ends, if you stay on the call for a few more minutes, just to, you know, share stories or, you know, give people time to ask additional questions, build in some of those kind of marginal spaces that we have lost in the online format. And that's to build that personal relationship and connection. I think that's where some of us are feeling somewhat isolated and lonely because we're not having those side conversations as much anymore. I also think that, you know, giving space to people to talk about what's going on in the world and how it's affecting them. An example of this would be in one of the courses that I taught in the spring, and that was done just on Zoom. This was right after the murder of George Floyd, and you know, I was feeling really heavy, and I knew my students were feeling extremely heavy about what was going on, and I opened the next class with, you know, I can't go on just like with class, like it's business as usual. I opened the space with, you know, I just want to share with you what I'm thinking and how I'm processing this. And I gave my students an opportunity to also process. We did that for about 15 minutes. So it took up a little bit, it took up a quarter of the class, but I knew that if I didn't do that and if I just sort of skated over, then I'm not really thinking about the educational experience, at this holistic level. I mean, we are human beings and we're experiencing things that are happening personally and societally. The classroom should be a place where we can debrief some of this stuff. And I think that, the research shows that people want to bring their whole selves to work. They want to, not that they're bringing all their personal problems, but it's more, I want to be able to show up at work and be open with my thoughts and with my feelings and with some of my, personal identity, concerns. And the more that work is a place where we can do that, the freer that we feel. There isn't this sort of boundary between my personal life and work life, because work life is personal, right? The boundaries, there really aren't these separations in terms of the way that we think and live. And yet the way work is structured sometimes forces us to create these separations, and then to kind of, oh, I'm going to work, I'm going to check myself at the door here, my personal values, my personal feelings or convictions and my struggles. Well, we're just kind of suppressing that. And that doesn't really lead to good outcomes. So we're finding that when people can share more of what's going on, that can be helpful. And I know, we have limited time in these online meetings. So I think what you're doing in terms of what went well, giving people an opportunity to share personal things, I think that's a great strategy. I also think that the value of frequency, like frequent communication, becomes more important in the online remote format, because now I'd have to look at the research on this, but my hypothesis is that when we have in-person meetings, there's a lot more residual effect that carries forward in terms of the interaction that happened in person. We can have wonderful interactions remotely. And I'm surprised when, students are surprised by how good discussion can be in a remote format, in a Zoom platform or a Microsoft Teams platform, for example. But the effects of those interactions, the sort of the positive effects, they don't seem to last as long. And so that's why I think consistency and frequency of meeting becomes pretty critical in the remote format. Building in space for some personal reflection and conversation.
How do you create that for the team that they feel safe? Because, a leader can say, well, I want you to be able to talk about your personal life, or, we're going to allow time for that. But how does that person open up and feel safe if they share some of that part of themselves?
It's such a great question, Paige, and it goes to this idea of how do you build trust in a team environment where people do feel safe to share personal things. It's like, does the vulnerability happen first, or does the sort of trust happen first? So in other words, do you need to trust somebody in order to be vulnerable? Or do you have to be vulnerable first in order to build trust? It's like,
yeah, that's like a chicken and an egg thing. Are we ever going to know the answer?
So this is where I kind of look to the work of Brene Brown, she's a social scientist in social work, and she's done so much qualitative research around vulnerability and courage. And it seems to be that in order to build trust, you have to be willing to take the risk to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So there's risk taking involved. And I think this is where the leader, that team lead, is going to need to go first and model the behavior that they are trying to really cultivate in the team. So whether that's you, Paige, or you, Jason, if you're leading a team, you can't expect your team members to do something that you're not willing to do. And also as a team lead, kind of considering, are there some rules or guidelines that we should all agree to in terms of how we're going to interact with each other and treat each other? And those could be very simple things, but sort of rules that everybody has consensus around. Like a simple one, confidentiality. If I share something that is personal, I don't want Howard to go share it with somebody else, right? So just even going over that guideline of, hey, what is said here of a personal nature, we won't share outside of this group unless we get specific permission to share your story with somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. So something as simple as that. So it's really, I think team leads need to set the model. They need to be risky themselves in terms of vulnerability. And I think that's part of the beginning place of cultivating trust on a team.
There is a bit of a movement now with Brene just being so popular with her books and her TED Talk, and of course, and her Netflix special and what have you. So there's more of an awareness that's happening, I think, as a result about vulnerability, transparency. But we have a perspective of leadership, right? Like, oh, if I'm a leader, I've got to be strong and stoic, which is almost contrary to being vulnerable and transparent, right? And I think this is the space that we've really got to dive a little bit deeper in on, especially as it comes to very uncomfortable topics, such as Black Lives Matter, such as diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially if there hasn't been training for that leader. I mean, I think nowadays leaders, real estate leaders, all leaders, but leaders in general who kind of basically worked up this rank up to management or ownership or what have you, it's not like they were fully equipped or we were fully equipped that, there's all this leadership training and specifically how to lead conversations, how to run Zoom meetings, how to create vulnerability and transparency and trust circles, right? All of this is kind of new. And so unless a leader does in fact take time to reflect, to learn, create awareness, you're just not going to have mattering happen.
I might have to have you repeat the question, but I wanted to say something really quick about vulnerability and the shifting culture I think, in businesses, in corporations around what do we want from a leader? And it used to be that the prototypical leader has always been male. And usually, demographically speaking, in terms of race, white. That landscape of leadership is shifting as we have more women moving through the pipeline and moving into the upper ranks of leadership, although we still don't have enough women there. We still have a long ways to go in terms of race and ethnicity and other identities, just thinking about LGBTQ. So still a long ways to go. We used to kind of want the command and control leader, and now we're moving to a place where no, we really need leaders who are empathetic and caring, are willing to be vulnerable and willing to make courageous decisions that are not always popular. So Brene Brown, she's doing actually a ton of consulting work with organizations in this space. And there's something that she said that I've really kind of latched onto. I think it came up in a podcast conversation she had with Krista Tippett, who's the host of On Being. And I'm a huge fan of that show. But Brene Brown says we need to kind of cultivate a sense of being, or a being where we have a soft front, strong back, and a wild heart. And what she meant by that is we need to be able to be vulnerable. That's the soft front. The strong back is knowing what our boundaries are, knowing what our convictions are, what our moral compass is, so that when those are violated, hey, we can kind of put up our hand and say that enough is enough. And then we have a wild heart, which means we're willing to dream, or we're willing to move into spaces where we don't really have all the answers, but we're going to take some risk. So I wanted to share that because I think it's a great visual. It's a great kind of, it's become a mantra for me: soft front, strong back, and wild heart.
You've kind of created this picture of this next generation of leader. I mean, obviously we're talking about the real estate space, and people have been in the real estate business for so long. They haven't necessarily had that training or even exposed to those ideas, to be honest, right? And that's what is I mean, we're trying to help create, this next evolutionary leader, to have the strong back moral compass piece, because that is part of leadership. And that soft front, I do love that as well, that vulnerability that Jason, you were alluding to earlier, just and the collaboration that you had with your other leaders, just to even talk about, hey, how do we do this? That wasn't just one person saying, well, this is the way we're going to do it, and that's it. It was rather this dialogue and conversation for the betterment of the culture of your team. So I think you did really respond. That is an amazing picture. I really do appreciate, I think, that perspective.
Vulnerability is a bit of a trigger word for some people because it makes them feel vulnerable. And who wants to feel vulnerable, right? That's a scary, scary thing. And again, and I know we've referenced Brene Brown here, but kind of building on what you had shared with us, Helen, is that she gives permission to be awkward, and that it's almost cool to be awkward. It's okay because you're being yourself. And in creating the environment where people are going to encourage you when you're awkward, because really, aren't we all?
First of all, Helen, I just want you to know, you described me physically before: soft front, strong back with a wild heart. But so how do I incorporate that into my business philosophy? And I try to be real vulnerable. And I think vulnerability to me, a lot of times, is kind of being humble, right? It's humility. It's being okay sharing not just the successes, but, the losses. And we try to listen and allow that to come out, because it's real, right? And especially right now, a lot of people are really struggling, and it's hard conversations to have. That actually does lead me to a question, in that sometimes, like, one-on-one is fine, let's all get vulnerable and, let's really talk about what's happening. But like in the group setting, like what's okay? How much do we talk about? How vulnerable do we get in the group setting?
That's a tricky question, because I think each person on a team is going to have a different threshold for what feels right. I don't think the objective is to have everybody spill their guts and for the workplace to become a place of therapy, because there are some things that people may share that others may be like, hey, that seems really out of the boundary here. I don't know that that's appropriate. And so, that level of appropriateness, it takes wisdom and discernment to kind of gauge that. But as time goes on, moving into some of our values, and then as time goes on, I think more and more will come out. So I'm going to let some of the sharing emerge organically, but I'm also going to be intentional about the kinds of questions that I do ask, and start with levels, up here and then moving a little bit further down, and then giving people the freedom to share as they are comfortable. And also, I think how are going to use the information that we hear from each other, how we're going to respect that information. That will be something that I will lay out up front with my team.
For emerging leaders and perhaps people that are new in that position, or maybe one that has established themselves for a while but is looking for a change in their company culture, what are some maybe tips that you have of things that they can do to start sort of bringing their team together?
You know, in thinking about what emerging leaders can do, I think I have two thoughts, and it's related to the concept of mattering. So earlier I talked about two sides of one coin. So the first side of the coin is feeling valued. So the emerging leader, if they're leading a team, can think about, how do I value my team members? Do they feel like they're acknowledged for who they are in the individual differences that they bring? Do they feel included in the team meeting? Do they have a voice on the team? Those are all elements of feeling valued. So that's one side of the coin. And then as a bridge to the other side, I want to I actually want to read this quote that comes from the Prelotensky article. And he writes, being valued is a necessary but insufficient condition for mattering. So I'll say that one more time. Being valued is a necessary but insufficient condition for mattering. Because if we flip the coin, the other side is, as human beings, we need to be able to make a contribution to ourselves and to others. So then as the emerging leader would need to ask the questions of, okay, are all my team members equipped and empowered to do this work? Have they been trained? Have they been mentored or coached on some of their gaps or some of their more challenging areas? Am I checking in with my team members to see how they're feeling, and sort of, are they meeting the outcomes, the goals that are important to them, and that also, by the way, contribute to the overall, team's goals and the output of the organization. So if you take care of the individual team members, your team is going to benefit and the organization is also going to benefit. But in order for the organization and the team to benefit, the individual really needs to be able to do well in their work, to have competency and mastery, and to also have some decision-making capability, so that the team leader, I think, and just in thinking about coaching, for example, a team leader can be a tremendous coach to the team member, but it's a reciprocal sort of conversation and relationship. It's not just that the team member the team leader is telling the member, here's everything you need to do. It's more the leader inviting the team member into conversation about, well, here are some things that we can think about. What do you think about this? What are your personal goals? What would you like to work on? What are some ways that I can support you in getting better at those things and in meeting your goals? So it's really a conversation. It's a two-way conversation. And so that's how I would, those are some of the initial kind of questions that the emerging leader can ask of themselves in relationship to their team members. Are they feeling valued, and do they have the opportunity, the training, the ability, the empowerment to add value to this team?
We've all experienced moments where we've really felt like something that we did mattered, and that we mattered, right? We've all had that experience. And I think all of us have also had the opposite feeling, the emotion. And it's another M word, because we're talking about mattering, we're talking about meaning, but feeling marginalized. And if we've ever felt marginalized in any way, it's one of the worst emotional and just, psychological, I think, experiences. It stays with you for a very long time, both on the meaning and mattering, as you feel, amazing. You remember that since you're a child, but you can also feel the opposite, where, boy, I feel marginalized right now. And I think that is a word that I know that professor also used in that TED the talk that he gave, and I think that's a good thing for us to think about as leaders. Boy, do any of my people feel marginalized?
And it's like, even you can even say the word, and that can even strike up an emotion or a feeling in somebody who has experienced that, because it's not a pleasant experience at all. And so I do think that's something we want to maybe delve into a little bit deeper. We're going to give you guys a break for now. We're going to slide into part 2 soon. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you were inspired by today's show. Be sure to sign up for your free trial of greenoceantv.com. Learn from master level industry experts and complete the all-important Go Actions. Go Actions help you and your team execute effective tasks in business and life each and every week. Thanks again, and we'll see you again soon.